Hi everybody, Dana Litwin here again, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week and next week, a mini-series on WTF, what were they thinking, moments of volunteer engagement and policy. This example came from a social media thread that kind of popped off over the weekend with a lot of colleagues from around the world weighing in. And the specific situation is that one of my colleagues in Canada wanted to volunteer with an organization that does work with immigrants, and was told that in order to volunteer with that organization, they had to sign an exclusivity contract to not volunteer with any other organizations, not just competitors in the same sphere, but they were not allowed to volunteer anywhere else. Now, this is unwise, unethical, and unfortunately not technically illegal. Volunteer laws and employee discrimination laws and non-compete clauses and things like that are not really clearly defined in Canada or the USA. And the assumption, with a little bit of a follow-up conversation with the organization by this person posting, was that they were worried about confidentiality and wanted to keep something exclusive and safe, but that also wasn't clear. So WTF, hashtag. This is not how you solve a problem of not enough volunteers or poor retention or feeling like other organizations are poaching your volunteers or whatever. This is the exact opposite of good volunteer engagement. Maybe something really bad happened. This organization felt like they got burned by somebody. We don't know, and they're not supplying the best information to kind of explain their position, other than they seem to have this distrust, this inherent distrust of people that they want as volunteers, which again, not gonna work in the long run, not a good strategy. The things to do instead, in addition to having, if you're worried about confidentiality or privacy for, people newly arrived in the country, new immigrants or refugees that you're working with, there's paperwork to solve that. There's policies to solve that. The policy to solve that should be written out in a volunteer handbook, or also ideally employees perhaps have confidentiality. That's the way to deal with it, is fairness across the board. If you're starting a volunteer relationship with antagonism or distrust, or forcing someone to comply, to feel that they have to only be exclusive, that's in the long run going to just get your organization into a death spiral of community engagement. If there isn't trust, how is somebody going to connect with your organization and even want to volunteer there with this kind of policy? Now, comparing that to corporate non-compete clauses, in the last couple of years in the USA, since about 2024, corporate employee non-compete laws have gone back and forth in court. So a lot of, especially tech corporations or design corporations, have non-compete clauses for employees, which have gone, again, back and forth in the courts of, is that legal, is that not legal? Currently, it's state by state in the USA. And some Canadian colleagues commented that volunteer laws and regulations can also vary province to province. We had my dear friend Tracy O'Neill sound off from Australia, and really from around the world have sounded off so far. And I hope to hear from colleagues in, say, South America or the global South to see if this has happened where they are, but I'll check in on the thread again after this. But it really shows that there hasn't been intentional work or design of welcoming, belonging, good volunteer engagement with this organization. So I'm hoping to get some more details, but here are some of the comments that colleagues said around the world. Again, dear friend of the channel, dear friend in real life, Fiza, was wondering, is it by chance a medical facility with the potential for outbreaks in a vulnerable population? So, okay, that could be a reason that you have exclusivity, is there's a medical reason, there's a contagion reason. But the original poster said, no, this is an organization that doesn't have anything to do with that. They support immigrants, but they're not worried about that. That wasn't the reason that they gave. They said they have this policy in place to avoid conflict of interest, and also mentioned that if they find out a volunteer is volunteering for a similar organization, that volunteer will be terminated. That is the most hostile volunteer engagement policy any of us who sounded off from around the world have ever heard. If you are worried about a conflict of interest, there's a form for that. There's forms for that that are filled out with nonprofits, with board members usually, or donors usually. You can absolutely have a volunteer sign a legal document that is, I don't have a conflict of interest and I will keep personal information confidential. So that's how you solve something like that. Next week, I'm going to talk about another WTF policy and kind of investigate where it is on the spectrum of helpful or harmful to an organization, which is pay to play. I hope you enjoyed the Tuesday tips this week. Please press like and share this with all of your colleagues and friends, and let's see how many hashtag WTFs we can get with sharing this bizarre policy and information. And I hope that if this video gets to that organization through the original poster sharing it or someone else, that they can start to change their policies to be more ethically compliant, better volunteer engagement, and still within legal requirements of non-discrimination and things like that within Canada. So WTF, let me know what you think about this, if you've ever heard of anything like this, in the comments below, and we'll see you next week. Take care.